Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Kelly Close, and thank you for joining this HealthyPlace.com Facebook Live. During today's show, we're going to talk about the cycle of domestic violence and how people get stuck in those abusive relationships. We'll talk to Janet Rhodes, a domestic violence survivor, and we'll talk to Dr. Trish Phillips, who's worked extensively with domestic violence victims over the years. If you have questions for our guests, please put them in the chat box. And if you have comments on your experience with domestic violence, you can put those in the chat box too. Many people will benefit from your questions and your comments, and we'll share them as the show goes on. Did you know that on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by their partner in the United States? By the end of this show, nearly 600 people will have been physically abused by their partner in the United States alone. So our first guest is Janet Rhodes. She was married to an abusive man for 15 years. Hi, Janet. Thank you for coming on with us today.
Hello, Kelly.
So you were married for 15 years, but in the beginning, he had to attract you somehow. So what was the beginning of that relationship like?
In the beginning, he definitely wasn't abusive. He was kind, he was quiet, he was really attentive. He would tell me things, I've never loved anybody like you before, and really made sure that I knew I was special. Mm-hmm. And, even his family would be, oh, you bring out the best in him and you're so wonderful. So there definitely was no abuse in the beginning at all.
So then at some point, the abuse began. Do you have any idea of what prompted that? What made him change?
I don't really, it wasn't anything specific. Mm-hmm. I started to notice about 1.5 to 2 years into the relationship that sometimes the way he talked to me wasn't how he talked to anybody else. It was very short. It was very, it was verbal abuse, but I didn't know it was verbal abuse, right?
It must have been very disheartening after being with him for a couple of years, maybe. What did you just say, 1.5 or so?
About 1.5 to 2 years, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was just like a little warning bell went off, and I thought, well, that's just weird. But I would make excuses for it, and I would say, he's having a bad day, work stressful, he's struggling with something, and I would just try and see how I could be better.
So there were little things that in hindsight are red flags, mm-hmm. but at the time it wasn't as obvious to you.
Exactly.
When did it become obvious?
The first real obvious abuse for me, we had moved in, and he was making omelets for breakfast, and mm-hmm. he asked me if I wanted onions in my omelet. And I thought at the time, that's a really odd question, because I don't like onions. But I answered him, I'm like, no, I don't want onions. And suddenly he exploded, started yelling at me and threw the frying pan at me and stormed out of the kitchen. And I was just in shock, because I'd never seen this behavior from him or anybody being like that to me. And I followed him into the living room, and I was like, what's wrong? And I was trying to calm him down. And he looked at me and said, if you don't shut up, I'm going to slap your mouth shut. And I had no idea what to say or do. And he started storming out of the living room, going into a bedroom, and he went to slam the door. And in defense of myself, I put my hand up to stop the door, because I was right in the door, pretty much in the door frame. And my hand got caught in the door. And I started yelling, my hand's caught. And then he started pushing on the door the more that I yelled. And finally, he let go of the door. And 2 of my fingers, one of them was badly cut open and skin was hanging off. And they were bleeding. And he just pushed past me and stormed out of the house and left.
So did you get to go to the hospital how did you handle that?
I didn't go to the hospital because I was embarrassed. I was already invested into the relationship. I'm like, how do I go to the hospital and say he did this?
Right.
You know, and how, you know, and I felt ashamed and I thought it was my fault. And so I bandaged myself up as best I could. I definitely should have got stitches. I've got a nice scar on one of the fingers. And I worked in a call center at the time where I typed. So I actually had to take some days off work because there was no way that I'd be able to do my job.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's really terrifying, Janet. I'm sorry you had to go through all that. And then, so you have to take care of yourself, and the shame that you felt, even though this wasn't your fault. You know, I understand why you wouldn't go to the hospital. A lot of people don't. And, you know, do you think that shame is what kept you in the relationship for a while?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely. Definitely. He was battering my self-esteem slowly. Like, I didn't even really realize it. He was slowly taking down my self-esteem. And and then, you know, you're invested to buy a house, you get married, you start having kids, and it's just, how do I get out of all this?
Right.
And, you know, by the time you realize what you're in, it's like you're stuck in a spider web. And it's like, how do I get out of it?
I can understand that. He exploded that day, and then he came back home. And I think I interrupted you there. What happened when he came back home?
He acted like nothing had happened. I tried talking about it. That's what I was used to, was, you know, if you have an argument, you talk about it after. And nope, he shut me right down and gave me an excuse. You know, why talk about it? It's just going to bring up bad feelings. And we weren't allowed to mention it again. And that became the course of our relationship. If there was an argument, if there was an explosion, you don't talk about it.
So I imagine that didn't make any kind of relationship at all. It was just kind of two people living in a house, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And your self-esteem is battered. And that incident, what happened in between that one and the next one? And how far apart were they?
He wasn't physically abusive in any way for about 4 more years. When I look back, I see he got more intense with each level of commitment in the relationship. You know, once we started having children, he seemed to get more controlling. I noticed a definite shift that he didn't like it that I gave the kids attention over him. Also, when we got married, I definitely started to feel more like a possession than an actual human being to him. And it just got more and more intense as we got further and further into the relationship.
And you're talking about the emotional abuse and the verbal abuse.
Yeah.
But at the time, a long time ago, we didn't have that kind of information about verbal and emotional abuse. So what did you think was happening?
I honestly thought he was just out of control. I thought he was explosive and out of control. It wasn't until I started going into counseling myself, and they're saying, you know, he has complete control over what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. And that was devastating for me, because I had told myself for over a decade that he was just in an explosive rage and acting out, or whatever reasoning I gave to justify why he was acting that way. And then for them to say, no, he knows exactly every little thing he's doing. I was like, oh, crap. You know, then I realized how serious it was and what kind of danger I was actually in.
We have a comment from Denise. She says, I went through the same thing. I was so scared. I couldn't make sense of anything and never knew when the next explosion would occur.
Yeah.
So That probably sounds pretty familiar to you.
Yeah. You start to what they call walk on eggshells.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when I'd hear him pull into the driveway or I'd hear his boots coming across the deck to come in the house, my stomach would drop because it was like, okay, what's going to happen this time? Or the weekend would be coming and my coworkers would be so excited. Hey, it's the weekend. What are you going to be doing? And I'd be like, ugh, because I knew, okay, this is going to suck for the next 2-3 days.
Now, was he kind in between all this? Was he ever kind to you, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. There was definitely honeymoon periods, definitely, you know, and those were the moments that kept me holding on because they'd be great. They'd be absolutely wonderful. He'd be the perfect dad. He'd be the perfect husband. I'd think, oh, okay, we got through a rough patch, right? And you know, you have your wedding vows in your head telling you for better, for worse, and you think, okay, well, it's just the worst, and now we're on the better part, right? And you feed yourself this, and so I go through that honeymoon period, and I think, oh, great, and then all of a sudden, wham, we'd be back into the abusive cycle again, and I'd be like, okay, here we go again. And I started telling myself, you just gotta hold on, it's gonna get better again, and yeah.
Well, Sandy says, Sandy wants to know, why did you find it so hard to leave? For her, she says she had no financial resources.
Mm-hmm. I had finances, but he had created a lot of debt in my name. I knew that I wasn't going to leave the children with him, so I knew I'd be raising 3 kids on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I also was terrified. He had, you know, said, I'm going to take you. He threatened my life. I'd seen how dangerous he could be, and I was really terrified of my, you know, for my life that something bad or I was going to be killed if I left. So I had to really carefully plan my escape.
And you did get out of there. That's amazing in and of itself. Was there any time before that you tried to leave but wasn't able to?
Yeah, there were quite a few times where I would tell him, you know, especially the last years of marriage, and I had secretly been counseling and learning about the abuse cycle. And so I was more aware of what was actually happening. And I would stand up to him and say, okay, you've got to go. You've got to leave. And he'd leave, but he'd maybe leave for 10, 15 minutes. Then I remember one time he walked back in and, you know what, this is my house too. Deal with it. And he walked downstairs. Or he'd be gone for a night and come back in the morning and then make all these promises, and I'd let him back in. And yeah, so I tried about 4 or 5 times, and I just realized I can't do this on my own. Mm-hmm. He's not going to leave on my own. And that's when I ended up actually contacting the police. And I walked into the police station. I said, listen, my husband's abusing me and he's abusing my kids. I can't get him out. I need your help. And they took me into a room and I told them what was happening, and they removed him that night.
Wow. And so after that, have you had any kind of contact with him? What happened after you were able to break free?
Well, that wasn't exactly when I broke free. I actually, you know, we got put under a no contact order, and he started calling me secretly. He wasn't supposed to have contact with me. He started making all sorts of promises. He started being the man that I always wished he would be. I also had his brother. He would come over and he'd be approaching, you got to talk to him. You got to work it out. And his whole family was working on me. And you got to honor your marriage vows. You got to give him another chance. And I started just feeling really guilty, like I was the one in the wrong. And so when, you know, then I let him come home. And the second, you know, all the no contact was lifted, the next day he went back to physically abusing our young son. And I looked at him and I said, you promised. You said you would never do this again. He said, I would have said anything to get off of getting off. There's he was sleeping in the living room. And then I realized, okay, I've been like completely had by all of them, including him. And it took about another year for me to actually be able to get him out. But during that time, the abuse escalated, and it turned into sexual violence and all sorts of things. Like he was just
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Rhonda wants to know if your children put any pressure on you to take him back.
They would say they missed him. So I would feel guilt as a mother, but they didn't actually. My younger kids were really young. So they really didn't. It was my oldest who I'd have more of a conversation. She was about 8 or 9. She was more the other way, saying like, he's got to go, or I'm running away, or I'm going to leave if you don't leave him, that sort of stuff. But then they would also, I miss Daddy, the younger ones, because they didn't understand what was going on. So I feel guilty.
Right. Well, you don't have any contact with him now, right?
No.
And it's been 10 years?
Yes.
And how is everyone doing? How are your kids doing? And how are you doing now?
Much better. I went through the court system. It took about 8 years, really long battle, but I got full custody of my kids. I have a lifetime restraining order against, and he can't have kids either. And we're much better. There's still rough times where there might be a trigger that happens, something that reminds one of us of the abuse or a nightmare. But we're definitely, we've done lots of counseling and lots of work on ourselves, and are, all becoming really well-rounded human beings. So it's
that's wonderful to hear. After all of that, and now, well, I'm so glad everybody's doing well. And thank you for being so honest and open today with your story. I know, and talking about the shame is really important too. And I'm glad your kids are well, and I'm glad you're well. And thank you so much for being here, Janet.
You're welcome, Kelly. Thank you.
Okay, if you're just joining us, welcome to our show. We were talking to Janet about her struggles in her abusive relationship. And if you have a question or a comment that you want to add to the show, you can do that, and we'll get to it as we go along. Our next guest is Dr. Trish Phillips. She's known on social media as the Doodle Doc, and she is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Orange County, California, and has worked with domestic violence victims in the past. So, Dr. Phillips, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an important discussion, such a hard discussion, and vulnerable. And I am in awe of Janet's ability to be honest and to bring forward this topic, and for you guys to bring forward this topic. It's so important. So thank you for having me.
Well, yeah, thank you. And Janet's story is amazing. I'm so glad, we talked to her a little bit about when she left and how hard it was. What are some of the other reasons that people find it difficult to leave their abusive partner?
There's a lot of reasons why it's very difficult to leave. So a lot of them were discussed about economic. So part of the control is to control the finances, to keep everything all locked up, and to keep let me talk in terms of abuser and victim. So to keep the victim feeling very controlled and feeling very victimized, like they have to be dependent upon the abuser. So there's economics. Maybe there's a feeling of like, I can't get a job. There's families situations. So the victim might be watching out for their family, for their kids. And, we have this construct that says, hey, this is what a family looks like. And like Janet said, he just had a bad day. And so there's a lot of like just negating and denial that goes into just presenting as a normal family. There's a lot of fears. There's a lot of, what will people think, and like Janet said, the first instance can be very shocking and sudden. And when that happens, then the victim often feels like, what just happened? Because our brains get very confused. When trauma is introduced into our brains, when chaos is in the family or violence is in the family, the brain goes into a fight or flight reactive pattern and often doesn't know how to reason through it. And so shame gets embedded inside of that, like Janet so bravely talked about. Right. And with that, then there's the embarrassment of going and talking about it or bringing it to the family. And that keeps the secret just longer. It just keeps it going on. And that's the cycle that can go on and the pattern that can go on.
And what if my friend were in an abusive relationship? What could I say or what could I do to help her? It sounds like from Janet's story, first you have to realize that you're being abused. Yeah. So maybe the better question is, how is it that today, when we have more education about, abuse, how is it that somebody can tune that out? Is that what happens?
Yeah. Yeah. Like the victim tuning it out?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And also our media, if we, a show on Netflix or Hulu glorifies, and a lot of our children are being brought up in a lot of what love looks like is domination, control, jealousy, those things that are just the beginning red flags of maybe something's not right. So
that's a very good point. The beginning red flags, you said jealousy and
control, needing to be right. When you try to talk to someone about what's going on in the relationship, there might be a sense of like justification, blaming you, feeling like, I didn't do that, or defensive, no, it was, I got drunk last night or something I didn't mean to, that kind of thing. And there's a different kind of abuse that's occurring now, especially with younger population, and that's online, that's in texting. So a relationship can have a whole different abusive level, through texting, through, shaming, through sharing intimate pictures.
You mentioned shaming again. Martha says, my mom kept asking me what I was doing to cause my husband to act like that. Absolutely. It really messed me up, and I kept thinking it was my fault.
Right. Right. It's the blaming the victim. So, yeah, if only you would have gotten dinner on, kept the house clean, kept the kids quiet, those kind of things. So many people do think that there's things they can do, and that puts the blame back on to the victim. Also, children pick up on that too. Like Janet said, her children, she thought she might have been shielding them. And we try to do that as good parents. We try to protect our children, but our children know. They can feel the tension. They can feel that energy that's in the relationship. And so what happens is the children then try to do that. They know that daddy's going to be coming home from work. And I'm just using gender stereotypes here. Females also are abusers too. But daddy might be coming home from work, and I better clean up my room. I better get my homework done, because that might make daddy really mad, and it might make daddy hit mom, or it might make him hit me.
And I think the funny thing from Janet's story is you can prepare and hope that you've got everything in line, but like when he threw the frying pan at her, you just don't know when it's going to happen. There's no rhyme or reason to it.
Right.
And it's pretty amazing that can happen. And Janet also mentioned a little bit of counseling. And I was wondering, what does counseling do for an abuse victim? And can you start it before you leave?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, there's so many hotlines available. You know, there's so many ways that you can reach out. You can get support. You can get support, you know, first of all, know your perpetrator. So know where you're safe. Maybe you do this at work. Maybe you go to your mom's house and you do it there. You know, get on someone else's computer so that you feel safer. But there's chat on there. There's texting. And, you know, there's places that have a lot of different language translators that can help with this. But counseling, what it does is it helps you to restore your sense of self-esteem. Janet made a great comment. She said, he was battering my self-esteem. And I'd never heard it put like that. And that is exactly what happens. You know, with each repetitive pattern of the cycle, the self-esteem starts to go down. And it's like, maybe this is me. Maybe I'm doing this. What's my part of it? And so counseling can help break that through, like to see, oh no, like Janet had said, you know, when the counselor said, no, this is not you, this is him being abusive. And to get someone to actually validate what deep inside, you know, beyond the shame, we know is like, no, this isn't okay.
Well, Ramika, she asks, if you're in an abusive relationship, is it realistic to be able to understand what's going on?
No, it's very difficult to know what's going on. And so, you know, oftentimes there, you know, somebody who is being abused there's, like Janet said, it happens very quickly. And so when that happens, it shocks us. And so it kind of sends our brain offline for a minute. And then we come back. And then like Janet said, her husband came back shortly after, didn't want to talk about it. So completely just kind of ghosted the whole conversation. And I'm not, you know, it didn't happen. Like it didn't happen. So it's kind of crazy making in there. And so that's why the pattern can continue. And with each repetitive cycle, that kind of crazy making might increase too. Yeah.
Is there, we talked about the beginning, well, there's the abuse, and then there's probably a honeymoon, and then there's tension, and then the abuse again.
Right.
So that's correct, right?
Yeah, and that's based on Lenore Walker's cycle, the cycle of violence. And it's, you know, it was written a long time ago, but it's still very present right now. It's still very relative and helping to explain it. And yeah, it's like the tension building stage is like where you start to feel like you're walking on eggshells. And what the victim does is starts to notice the abuser's maybe anger going up, maybe the critical words coming out more, maybe drinking might go up a little bit, or drug use. And what they try to do in that place, the victim, is try to de-escalate their abuser. And I always say is that the victim knows their abuser very well. This is a dynamic in a relationship, and so they can tell that energy when it's a good day and when it's a bad day.
Right.
Yeah, and so that will then they could be in that cycle for quite a period of time. It could feel like walking on eggshells, just evaluating the day, and then it goes into the abuse stage or the acute stage where the violence happens. Sexual, physical, emotional, it just escalates for the power to get back in that control. And then that is generally the shortest period. It can be like 20 minutes to 2 hours, but there's no set, you know, but it is generally the shorter. And then it can go into the honeymoon, and there you're going to hear like a lot of remorse, or I'm so sorry, that won't happen again. Please, you know, just give me one more chance. What are we going to do with our family? You know, we've got this big mortgage payment, you know, things like that. And so in that point, that's where maybe, you know, court cases might be dropped, where somebody might move back in, or they won't move out if they have said they decided they're going to move out. And then with each, as time goes on, those cycles seem to get closer and closer and closer. So like Janet said, it took like 4 years until the next one, but she noticed little like moments of, you know, verbal abuse or emotional abuse. but the physical didn't come for 4 years.
I have there's a man who's being abused by his wife. He says he called the police and they came to the house. She claimed he was abusing her, and the police wouldn't believe him because he's a man. And that seems to be, a story that I hear often. Is there anything in particular a man might want to do that's different from what a woman would want to do?
Well, there are specific males, like malesurvivor.org is one place where he could go to get some specific resources. But I would suggest counseling for him because unfortunately in our society, even for him to call is amazingly courageous and brave to do that, because it still unfortunately goes so against our society, for a man to be seen as whatever weak or whatever that would be. And it's just not true. Abuse is abuse. And so, yes, to start maybe with the hotlines, to start with a counselor to help build up that esteem, because that is part of an abuser, is that they're going to manipulate the information, and all abusers do that,
Male or female.
Male or female. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today. And we're going to go ahead and go now. But the information you gave us was really good. Did you say that what malesurvivors.org is at the website you gave?
Yeah, malesurvivors.org. There's another one that I want to point out too. That there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It's called hotline.org. So that's a main one. But there's womenslaw.org. And that is such a great resource too, because it can give a survivor specific information in their state, but also legal advice is often needed, because that can be a trap too. It's like, I don't know how to get away. I don't know how to get a restraining order. I don't know how to do these things. And then another one that's really helpful too, in case we have any therapists watching or just for victims, is stopabuseforeveryone.org. And what I really like about that site is they have PDFs that kind of can fold into trifold pamphlets, and they have it on like sibling abuse, because when a child witnesses domestic violence or partner abuse, it can often go into like a sibling battering or sibling bullying. And so they have different pamphlets like that. They also have a male survivor one. They have an elder abuse and different things like that. So that's just a couple of resources.
Those are great resources. A few of them I hadn't heard of before. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank you for being here today. And everything you said was very helpful. And I just appreciate you so much. So thank you.
Okay.
And that wraps it up for us here at HealthyPlace.com. You can go to our website and we have information on domestic violence. And we have a blog called Verbal Abuse in Relationships, where people with lived experience write about what's happened to them. And I really appreciate you being here today. I hope you got a lot from this. Thank you so much. See you next time.